All right, we are getting in these live visuals from Tianjin, the hotel where Prime Minister Modi is going to be residing. Heartwarming visuals of these Chinese nationals who you can see are welcoming Prime Minister Modi with that recital of the tabla. Such is the popularity of Indian classical music in China. In fact, several members from the Chinese community have already indicated their interest in various Indian forms of Indian classical music and even dance forms like Bharatnatyam. But over here, what you can see are Chinese nationals, in fact, performing not just the tabla, but also the sitar over there. Prime Minister absolutely thrilled by that performance. Several of them, as you can see now, many of those Chinese nationals performing the Bharatnatyam. Let's quickly go across to Rahul, who's in fact joining us live from Tianjin itself. He is in fact at the media center in Tianjin to cover the SEO summit. So heartwarming visuals bearing testimony of Prime Minister's soaring popularity across the globe, and that's an open secret, Rahul. But to see that in Tianjin itself is equally heartwarming. Give us a sense of the diaspora community, where all they have come from, and what is it that you have learned through your interactions with the Indian diaspora there?
Well, there are a large number of Indian nationals who've been based here, doing business here, speak fluent Chinese in different dialects. In fact, that I met through the day. They've been coming to Tianjin over the last 2 or 3 days. This is a historic city because it's the gateway really to trade in China. It's a gateway to the upper country river systems that feed, in fact, Beijing. So a lot of trade moves through this port and through the river system, the riverways up to Beijing. And a lot of this trade comes actually from SCO countries like India. So it is not incidental that we are actually having this summit here. It's also, of course, a message because Tianjin was heavily colonized, one of those enclaves which continued to be colonized for a longer period in Chinese history, as a result of which the choice again of venues is symbolic because, again, if this is supposed to be a non-West grouping, then Tianjin sends a message to the world that this is a non-West grouping that sees its own strategic autonomy through the lens of a South-South cooperation and a South-South platform like the SCO. But more importantly, talking about the Indian diaspora, large number of them have come from Shenzhen, which is supposed to be China's Silicon Valley. They're here because they are eyeing prospects, improving prospects between India and China. Remember, the Chinese economy is going through a bit of a drawdown at this moment in time. It hasn't been showing the results that many people have associated with China, the double-digit growth rates that we saw in the early part of the 2000s. Those days have long gone. China, in fact, now growing at about 4.5%, 4.8%, 5% at the very most in a good quarter. So there has been, in the last few years, a softening, and that is also bringing the Chinese into this conversation and wanting to renew an equation with India. India today is seen not just as a place for investment, but also a place from where you can source a large amount of goods and services for your own economic needs. And that's where this particular tango has salience or assumes salience, and it is therefore that you have a large number of Indians who are eyeing that trade pie, hoping that perhaps they can come here, convince Chinese companies to come to India, partner with them. There are investment caps, as you know. There was also, of course, over the last few years, a conscientious decision that was taken by the Indian government to scrutinize the kind of Chinese investment that was coming in, given the fact that there were some security concerns regarding some companies doing business in India. The entire move towards the reworking of India's cellular networks, 5G, etc., necessitated India looking at very closely the security clearances of Chinese companies and, of course, those that are involved in the IT sector, because, as you know, there is a back door that can easily be opened and it can lead to catastrophic consequences. But more than that, you have this entire diaspora that is invested heavily from both sides. Remember, these are both civilizational countries that have had ties that go back hundreds of years, thousands of years, in fact. They have Buddhism in common, India, of course, being the seeding ground for the world for Buddhism. And there is a lot of tourism that is expected between the two countries. And that is the focus of these talks, to ensure that those contacts are leveraged. And obviously, beyond that, the more gainful economic cooperation that will help in creating jobs and prosperity on all sides. Akanksha.
Absolutely. In fact, to stay with the visuals that have come in, these are visuals which will in fact also go down in the archivals, because remember, it's a very significant visit. Prime Minister visiting over there to China, making that visit after 8 years, and that holds special significance. And when he's welcomed by the Chinese community, which is in fact playing out those Indian classical recitals, whether, as I can see, Rahul, one is playing the tabla, one is in fact playing the sitar, and you also have a Bharatnatyam performance over there. In fact, reports are also indicating the growing interest within the Chinese community as far as Indian arts are concerned. But having said that, do you sense a fresh, renewed hope now that Prime Minister has made this significant visit, and much rests upon the bilateral meet as well? Of course, everything seemed to be in a limbo after the Galwan clashes, but you rightly highlighted the kind of business that has been happening for decades, which of course came to a screeching halt post Galwan. Do you sense a ray of hope in terms of a revival between India and China?
Yes, absolutely. Remember, Kangsha, that as I said, we have civilizational ties. So that shouldn't be really a surprise, because there is a lot of goodwill for India on the streets of even Tianjin. A large number of people keep coming up to us. There's a lot of curiosity about the country. There's a lot of goodwill, as I said, at a people-to-people level. But let's not overemphasize the gains here, because yes, while this will lead to a thaw and perhaps even the two sides beginning to sort of, at some level or the other, come to terms with a new global world order where you have a lot of insecurity which has been built into it by the irrational actions of one man, self-styled most powerful leader of the world. You have a situation where there is incentive there, an impetus for these two sides to talk. But what those talks will lead to is anyone's guess. And a lot will depend on the issues that are actually on the table, because those issues will determine really fundamentally how this conversation is going to move forward and how stable this relationship is going to eventually become. Because don't forget that we come into this with a lot of doubt on the Indian side. We've just had Operation Sindoor, where the Chinese played a hand that was previously not assumed to be one that they would actively sort of pursue, but there was a live intelligence sharing of operational details that led, of course, to the Indians taking a very, very circumspect view of their collaboration, their collusive collaboration, if I may add, with Pakistan. And that's really a matter of concern, because if this relationship is to grow, even in the trade dimension, there has to be a modicum of trust. And those confidence-building measures, those people-to-people contacts, it's not as if we haven't been here. This is going to be the third attempt, really, by the Prime Minister to kickstart this relationship. In 2014 was, of course, one of those very, very important attempts that were made. Then you had, unfortunately, the Doklam that sort of came in and disrupted equations once again. And then there was another attempt in 2017. And now, of course, we have a third attempt by the Prime Minister to try and bring this particular relationship back on track, to make it more meaningful for the populations of both countries at a time when both of them, in fact, are facing global headwinds. India, of course, from tariffs from Donald Trump, and China internally, because its own economy, as I said, is spluttering. It's not showing the signs of robustness that defined it in the late 1990s, all through that last decade and the early 2000s. So we have a situation here where there is need for both these big countries, massive countries who contribute so much to global prosperity to come together and hold meaningful conversations. But those can only happen if the environment is conducive. Remember, one of the 7 mottos of the principalities, of the conditions, the totems, or the commandments of the SCO is building mutual trust. Can that actually happen? That's the fundamental question that we have to look at, and a lot will depend on how actually Xi Jinping walks the talk. It's all very well to say that, look, we must build a conducive environment for trade between our two countries and the full potential and realization of our equations, but it's quite another to walk the talk and win India's confidence. And I have to say that the ball actually is squarely in Xi Jinping's court.